last time we recorded, we did not expect the Hornets to score 145 points in a game.
Correct.
Against the San Antonio Spurs, which they only won by 9. Can I say they gave up 134 points to the San Antonio Spurs, who don't even have Victor Wembanyama or De'Aaron Fox playing. So that's kind of a little bit worrying, but it's weird, right? I think it was like the most threes ever made in the game, the second most points ever scored in a game, and I just don't really feel like it registered on like my consciousness much. Like just because of the time it happened a year in the season, like the last 3 seasons, it just doesn't feel like it's. Even though I read the records on paper, it didn't feel impactful to me, which is just like a sad state of affairs.
Yeah. So, are you familiar with like on Reddit the subreddit "Am I the Asshole"? Are you familiar with that?
I'm not.
Like, it'll be like, am I an asshole for thinking blah 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 blah, and then the people put the prompts in and they'll explain why, and then people comment either saying yes you are or no you're not. And I felt like an asshole because I want to be excited for what the Hornets did against the Spurs, but then like who cares? Like the Spurs are going nowhere. They're done. They're done. And this performance, while fun and exciting, and I'm happy that they're able to like see the return to joy, right? It's just in a cloud of like, fuck, man, like like it's been such a dead season and such a failure to really like get up to meet bad teams. And it's just like, well, they did it, I guess, but they also like gave up 80 points. Yeah, 79 points in the second half. So it's like, what did I even witness? Spend my time watching here. Like it all just feels artificial and empty. And I want to be excited about it, but it's still like so much stuff like blah around it.
You know what? And you're right. Like I'm torn when I see some of the stuff. So like you see people interviewed afterwards and they're all like, chests out. Like you can tell that they're feeling it and they're confident. And there's part of me where I'm like, you know what? The NBA season is long. Like Nick Smith probably isn't going to score 26 points regularly in the NBA, and he should be absolutely pumped to do it. And like he went 6 or 7 from 3. So there's part of me which I'm like, yeah, enjoy your moment. You had a big win. You had a night where like everyone's shooting from everywhere. It's going in. Like you should be able to live in the moment. Like because if you don't find joy in like any of those moments, then like your whole NBA experience is just going to be like sad unless you're on the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then there's part of me which is like, can we not be like so kind of like arrogant and carried away when the team are, one of the worst teams in the NBA and have struggled to really put anything together, showing competitive winning basketball in the last 3 seasons. And like, keep telling like there's a little monkey in my head. I'm like, I keep telling that side, like, no, like you're being unreasonable. Your frustration of your long-term following the team, you're now projecting onto these individuals. You've got no right to carry that around. And if they carried that around, it would not be a healthy thing for them or for the team. So I think it is normal for fans to feel like conflicted on this because you're like, it's just a bizarre situation to be like celebrating, and especially like at the moment, it's like, well, actually, if they'd not won that game, I think they'd be like 1 game ahead of the Wizards or something of that nature. So there's that whole thing as well, which people are feeling. So I think it's all right at this time of the year to feel conflicted about it. And I think the biggest thing, like if you knew them personally, the players and the coaches, for them to have those moments, those wins, like you need to have those little mini wins in the season to kind of give you some positive reinforcement and to keep that buy-in of what you're preaching is working. So as conflicting as it can be, like I'm here to tell you, and I've told myself, it was a good thing, and I'm happy it happened. And even though it might not feel as good if it happened in November, early in the season, it was still a lot of fun watching that game. And look, that's what sports are for, right? We're here to have fun. And watching LaMelo hit 7 threes, Josh Green hit 6 threes, Nick Smith hit 6 threes. I mean, that was a out-of-body experience, and I'm happy for Eric Collins.
Yeah, no doubt. You got to get in his bag again. I'm excited I'm happy for the social team because they were cooking. They're like, yo, let's go. They were firing off incredible content pieces that night and the next day. Like I know they've been waiting to do something like that for a while. What just sucks is the follow up, which makes everything that happened kind of snap back into focus. What happened in LA. So yeah, that is like where if they played the Clippers competitively, I would have enjoyed the San Antonio win more because it would have seemed on trend of something more positive to end the season on not a high note, but just on a better trajectory where you can say like, okay, this piece, and this piece all work together and you can kind of see what's missing where versus another night where they don't show up against a much better team.
Yeah. And like, I'll actually say, and I don't often do this because this is like a really lazy thing to do, but the first half of the Hornets Clippers game, all right, I think at halftime they were already down by, 15 at halftime. The first half of that game, the Hornets missed a ton of open threes, and James Harden hit some really tough shots, and Kawhi Leonard hit some really tough shots. And if you balance those open threes out that the Hornets had and the difficult contested shots that Harden hit, if you balance them out to like irregularly over the season, I think that actually would have been close. I don't think they played that poorly, but those things are going to happen, and obviously the Hornets just used up a bunch of shooting variants in that game, the one before. One thing that is notable is we've seen it wasn't just a one-off now. Daquan Jeffries is now in the starting lineup ahead of Nick Smith Jr., which is like something that's not really been discussed. I don't think I've heard Charles Lee talk about it in much detail, but why do you think Charles Lee went for that decision?
My mind either goes towards with LaMelo back, allowing LaMelo to take the majority of those shots and allowing Nick Smith to, I don't say carry the load, but you have the freedom to put up shots in the second unit and allow Jeffries just to be that guy that stands in the corner or on the wing, where Nick has a little more freedom to operate in that second unit. That's my initial thought. What do you think?
I think I'm with you. I think like Nick Smith Jr., even if like things go right for him, he's probably not going to be a starter in the league. Okay. Right. He's going to be that off the bench combo scorer. And like, maybe it is just like, hey, Nick, we want to see how you do, like how you play that role. We want you to be a little bit more aggressive. We want to play through you a little bit more, but it's going to be in the second unit because we think that's like our vision for you long term. And maybe that's the case. I also think there's an element of like, we want to try and boost our defense a little bit. Yep. And Jeffries is a better defender than Nick Smith Jr. He gives you more size, gives you more physicality, gives you more rim gravity, which I think could maybe help, guys like LaMelo Ball in terms of being able to kind of get some driving kicks. So I don't hate it. And I think Daquan has done okay, right? There's been games where it's looked really good, like the Spurs game. And then in the Clippers game, it wasn't brilliant, but he's like doing kind of good role playery things as much as you can extent for someone who's like borderline in the league. But I do think they've probably, like Nick Smith Jr. was also like on a bad stretch, right? We talked about it just recently that he was not playing well and just trying something new. So again, I don't think Daquan Jeffries is, going to be a long-term starter in this league by any means, but I'm not surprised that they went that way. Like now LaMelo is back, Miles Bridges is back, although they're both, it appears, going to miss the Hawks game tonight when you listen to this. But now that they're mostly back, you probably not desperate for like Nick Smith Jr. shooting and scoring in that first unit as you were earlier in the season when those guys were missing a lot of time. Any other takeaways from that Clippers Hornets game?
I hate the Clippers jerseys. I don't know what they're made out of, but when the guys start sweating, it just looks so weird because the color, just the jersey tops just discolor so much compared to the shorts. Like it looks super Bush League, and I don't know what's going on with that. But that's it. That's the only other thing.
Clippers branding has always been a train wreck. Like there's never been a moment where I'm like, yeah, that Clippers court, uniform, warm-ups, anything look good. It's always been a struggle there. And it should be cool, right? Like LA, You should be able to figure out a brand that works there, and they've just not been able to do it. A couple of kind of things that I made some notes on. I've seen some people pushing this narrative that Moussa Diabate is the best center on the Hornets roster. And I think like this is one of those games against the Clippers where like you understand his limitations. I mean, Ivica Zubac just like pushed that guy around. Because remember, Diabate he's extremely fit and athletic, but he's not super strong. Like, well, let me rephrase that. He's strong for his size, but he's like 6'9", 6'10", and muscular. He does not have the brute force of someone like Zubac, who is like 250 pounds, 7 foot. And when you're put starting center in the league, like you're going against people of that size pretty much every night. And we've seen Diabate had success at times, but being a defensive anchor against that type of size, that's something else. So that was one thing I just taken away. Is like, if you want to talk about Diabate should be the starter in this team going forward, I think he is perfect as a off the bench big who can come in, switch. You know, if you want to play switching defense just to end the game for whatever reason it is, you can bring him in as a specialist. If you want to, just have a guy crash the boards in that second unit, I think he's absolutely fine at that. And I think that's what the vision of him on this team should be.
No, it's valid. I love what Diabate has done this season, and I hate for people to get over hyped about it because then it kind of forces you to kind of like be negative towards him. When in reality, this guy is extreme. Like he's an incredible workhorse, overachiever at that spot. And yes, he can have flashes as a starter, but yeah, to your point, when you have a big body like Zubac, it's a long day, and that is where you for me, I like to see Nurk in that role against just go big body on big body, because Mark Williams can get pushed around as well. So it's the Hornets are limited in their options, but to say Diabate is the best center it's a bit of a stretch, and it kind of hurts your case long.
And I wish Lee would stop playing the three of them. I just wish that he would like sit down with the three of those guys, look at the rest of the games this season, and say, "Look, Mark, you're going to play these games, and like we're going to play 2 of you a night, and 1 of you is going to sit each night, and we're going to rotate that based on opponent matchup, whatever it is, right? Rather than finding this where like Diabate is playing 10 minutes, Nurkic just playing 10 minutes, and then you got Mark Williams playing 25 minutes. I just think it's hard for both of those other guys to get a flow, and I think it's hard for guys playing with them to get a flow. There's a reason you don't see that like in the NBA very often, playing 3 centers. I just again, I think it's like trying to placate everybody, make everyone happy towards the end of the year. There's nothing to play for, but I just think there's a more effective way of doing it. Mark Williams, we should mention, 18 points, 15 rebounds, 5 offensive, 7 assists, a career high, 7 assists. That has to be mentioned. Like he played, I thought, with good energy. He was really active on the glass. Again, we've seen games like this from Mark Williams where he just looks like he's really locked in and he's engaged in the game. And it's a good job that he was, because if it wasn't for him, this could have been like under 80 points for the night. Again, it's hard, right? It looked so effortless that night. Like it just looked like it was something he would do every night. It's not like he hit shots and that's what happened. You just wish you could find some more consistency, because like the playmaking, especially the 7 assists, he's had a few high assist games this year. He's also had a bunch of like 1 or 2 assist games. And some of this is about how other defenses play against the Hornets and how they put 2 on the ball and try and challenge Mark Williams to take plays. And I thought he did that okay, but the Hornets like had some really bad turnovers in that Clippers game. I mean, forcing passes just into areas that there weren't any, like Derek Jones Jr., Kawhi Leonard, Zubac, Norm Powell. These are not guys that you can just like throw the ball around. They've got active hands, they've got length, they've got anticipation. And time again, like some of the turnovers which led to transition points were costly. But they did do a good job at other times of finding Mark Williams in the seam, which Charles Lee wants to talk about a lot. So a good night for Mark Williams. It should be noted that he's had a little bit of a bounce back here after a slow run of form after the trade fell through.
And looking at the rest of the way, believe there's one back-to-back left, I think. The Pelicans and then Jazz on the 30th and 31st. So hopefully we get to see some consistent just Mark Williams out there the rest of the way. Because if he's part of the team next year and still doing this back-to-back stuff, like it's gonna hurt. And they have to figure out where they want to be with him.
Yeah. All right, let's move on. I think it was over the weekend and last week, ESPN came out with an article talking about the 7 tanking teams in the league. It was an article by ESPN's NBA reporter Brian Windhorst, who's probably their most prevalent insider outside of Shams Charania. Obviously, Windhorst has covered the league, mostly in the Eastern Conference, for a good while now. And Tim Bontemps, who again is their like Eastern Conference beat reporter. You know, neither of those guys have a particularly strong track record of being linked into what the Charlotte Hornets are and aren't doing over the years. Adrian Wojnarowski was normally the guy who's most linked in there. Shams notoriously has kind of been a little bit off base with that, especially around the old Scoot draft. Scoot Brandon Miller moment. Shams took a big L that day. But it was interesting. In this article, there was a few quotes that both Windhorst and Bontemps had from scouts, league personnel, and one of them was about LaMelo Ball. I guess before we get into that one, I thought there was actually a good reflection from Windhorst talking about that teams around the league have been impressed with what Jeff Peterson and the new front office have done in their moves so far, making the necessary rebuilding moves. I think one of the quotes from an opposing scout said, they're checking the boxes on the things they need to do. Which sounds like, well, that's straightforward, isn't it? But I've been part of many rebuilds with the Charlotte franchise. They've not ever really rebuilt this way. Like, often the rebuilds are, you know, they don't take on like bad money for draft picks because obviously they wanted to have a relatively low cost to the team under the previous ownership. And they would not trade away players at peak value. You know, they would hold on to them too long until they had no value left. So I think they are actually doing all the right things that they need to. But I think that's the first time this franchise has really, truly done that. For basically the amount of time I've been covering the team here for the last 15, 20 years. This is a proper rebuild. And they deserve credit for that because those rebuilds are more painful than like some of the ones we've done in the past, which have been short, 1 or 2 seasons. They're doing it the proper way, and I think it's good that got recognized, and it's been recognized around the league too.
Yeah, and I'm glad because, you know, it's rare for a franchise to have multiple owners that are over the franchise's history that are considered among the worst in the NBA. And arguably the Hornets have had 3 terrible owners. And now they have Rick and Gabe who are getting some love. And they have a chance now to change the viewpoint of the franchise from being a circus or dumpster fire, whatever pejorative you want to put on it, that was built and deserved from previous administrations. Now Rick and Gabe have this slow-rolled, patient approach that we've seen. You know, we haven't seen the payoff yet. Obviously, we're still in the middle of it, but I'm glad outside in the NBA world they're seeing what's happening here.
Yeah. Now, most interestingly, they went on to talk a little bit about the future roster for the Hornets. And this is, again, another quote, which was said, there may not be too many players on their roster they're not willing to discuss in deals this summer, one executive said. It may start with Brandon Miller and not go too far after that. You know, insinuating there that Brandon Miller might be the only untouchable guy on the team. Or if it's not just Brandon Miller, then it's Brandon Miller and 1 or 2 others. And then it follows on saying that raises the obvious question, what about LaMelo Ball? Well, this is according to Tim Bontemps. Sources said the Hornets have no interest in moving on from their star guard. But interestingly, later in the very next paragraph, it says, Ball, meanwhile, is already on his 2nd contract. That makes it an interesting situation to monitor moving forward. One scout said LaMelo is the question there, as in, will he be there going forward? Mm-hmm. So within the same piece, you've got sources saying the Hornets have no interest in moving their star guard, but then you have an opposing scout of another team essentially speculating that like maybe they would move on from him. So where do you fall on this? I mean, I know we talked about like what we would do a little bit last week or maybe the week before, but in terms of what do you think the team will do? Because it obviously seems to be different messages, mixed messages around this in league circles on if the Hornets will or won't move Ball. So what do you make of this report, and what do you think will end up happening with the Ball? If you to split it, 100% split whichever way you want, 50-50, 75-25, how would you split that?
On split the interest in the Hornets, like, because I'll answer your question in a second, but like in the first quote, the no interest in moving on from their star guard, that seems extremely strong. And that implies that they wouldn't entertain calls about him. And I can't imagine them not taking calls or having a discussion about it. And so I think it's a 100% chance that the Hornets will have discussions about what his value is, what do they want to do, what the team's timeline looks like without him. Like that I'm sure it's already happened too, by the way. Like I'll be shocked if that wasn't happening right now or has been going on. And then, so yeah, I just want to say that first. So whether or not he's on the team next year, I don't know, but they have to have this conversation. They have to be honest with themselves. So to say no interest is such a strong phrase from Bontemps. I'm like, what? Let's pump the brakes a little bit.
I agree, and if I'm being honest, I just don't believe it.
The no interest part?
Yeah, I mean, look, Tim Bontemps might have like reached out to people he know in the Hornets front office or people around it and said, look, would you guys consider moving LaMelo in this summer? And they might have gone back and said no. So yeah. I'm not saying like he's lying in his reporting. That might have been what he's told. I just don't think I believe what he's been told. Like you say, if he'd worded it saying like the Hornets would be reluctant on moving on their star guard, that would make, but you're right. No interest in moving on. That just doesn't make sense for like several reasons. One, the questions around LaMelo Ball's health. Okay. Two, the questions around the style of his play and the awkward fit, I would say, potentially with the way I think this team is going in terms of its vision. Three, that it is a new ownership and front office that did not draft or sign Ball. And four, the timeline of this team, which we talked about before, is now probably looking towards 2027 onwards for the playoffs, which is towards the latter end of LaMelo Ball's contract. Mm-hmm. So to have no interest, considering all those things, that just to me just doesn't pass the sniff test.
No, and then especially with the lottery still yet to play out, like what if they end up with the second pick and are staring at Dylan Harper?
Yeah,
like you're gonna have to have those pros and cons conversations. And I would hope as a Hornets fan, if they decide to put out feelers about this, that they actually shop him around and become interested and like fully interested and pretty like visible in this to get the best deal possible if they go down that route. And this doesn't turn into like a secret Luka situation, because that's not good for anybody. That's not good for anybody involved. But yeah, no interest is such a strong phrase, even now. Like it's a lot. It's a lot. And it has me. It raises an eyebrow for sure. But if it's valid, and they truly believe in LaMelo Ball and Brandon Miller as the guys here, then I wouldn't be shocked. But to say no interest is strong.
And maybe there's a world where they're like, hey, like LaMelo Ball was playing extremely well early in the season when he had a mostly available team. Mark Williams wasn't available, but everyone else was there. Right? Grant Williams, Trey Mann, Brandon Miller. Okay, like they had the veterans at that point. And he was playing extraordinarily well. And then Grant Williams dropped. He was a huge part of what they were doing, and he was key for LaMelo Ball in that dribble handoff game. Trey Mann went, okay, there's the other scoring threat, which teams used to have to worry about, which all of a sudden now they don't have to. Then Brandon Miller went down, and the other scoring threat, the off ball, and all of a sudden they're just able to put everything on LaMelo. And maybe there's well as saying, we have to see more of that. Like, we have to see, we want our other players to develop a little bit more, and we want to see LaMelo Ball over a bigger sample size playing alongside these guys. And here's another thing that I only just considered today after reading the Slam article about LaVar Ball. I don't think it's been talked about enough. The fact that, like, LaMelo's dad almost died in January and February because of this. If you've not read this, by the way, LaMelo Ball did an interview with Slam. Obviously had his foot amputated, or half of his leg amputated, just below the knee, earlier this year. And he said that the issue was it was a complication from an infection and a mixture of his diabetes diagnosis, which essentially meant they had to cut off his 2 toes, then a foot, and then go all the way up to his knee. Okay, to save his life. Right, this was not like, he dropped something on his foot and they had to amputate it. This was because he was blood poisoning around his whole body. That happened in January and February. Like, there were times where LaVar even said it in his article. He's like, I don't know if I was gonna be around. Like, maybe I didn't want to fight it anymore. We've just not talked about that being a factor potentially into like any of LaMelo Ball's drop off in play since February. Like, we talked about it last week, the drop off. We talked about the injuries. We've seen that, but we've not talked about the human side of it. And I think it's important we acknowledge that, partly because like LaMelo's not talked about it and it feels speculative, but I think it's a reasonable thing which we should consider.
No, I think that's totally valid. And LaMelo might not even know it's bothering him. Like, you kind of go about your day to day, and just when real life stuff happens, it's easy to fall in routine and kind of block things out. And so that is a very valid thing to bring up, and something I hadn't considered as a potential reason for his drop off, because that is a lot. That's a lot to carry with you. And basketball seems pretty like trivial when a parent is going through something like that.
And if they are, saying off limits for LaMelo Ball, like next year is the last year. Okay. Like, if there is another disappointing season, if LaMelo Ball doesn't make progress in his areas of weaknesses, if the team are not able to win at a higher clip, like then they absolutely will. I mean, I thought this was kind of like the season where it's like, hey, this is the last one. And maybe they just have that extra year of patience, because like if they are rebuilding and they are going to be bad again next year, LaMelo Ball's pretty good cover, right? For season tickets, for relevance, for jersey sales. Like, to have someone as like to masquerade as a competent basketball team while secretly you want to lose, LaMelo Ball could be a good option for that.
Yeah, true. But I also wonder if there's like a merciful aspect to it, where the ownership and go to LaMelo like, listen, this rebuild is going to take a little longer than expected. Do you want to be part of this or not?
Mm-hmm. And
if the answer is yes, cool, let's work with it. If not, we'll find you a home, because we're not trying to win right now. And I don't know if we'll ever find out if that happens, but I could see a side where the ownership comes to him with that proposition. And similarly to Bridges, because he's in his prime right now. And I want to imagine that a guy in his late 20s wants to play competitive basketball for a competitive basketball team. And at some point, I'm sure he would like to be in the playoffs and in that scenario, because at this rate, it's never going to happen for him playing here, right? So I wonder if they have these like let's do a vibe check on what your priorities are as a player, as a contributor to the Hornets, and see if it aligns with, if you're happy with to be part of this situation that's going to take a little longer than we might have expected.
I think that's reasonable, and I think that could be something that happens this summer. Between the end of the season and the draft lottery, when you go through the exit interview process, it might be like, how are you feeling about the future here? For all the noise LaMelo Ball gets and the stick that he gets, he's like never really said one thing about bad about Charlotte or being with the Hornets, right?
Mm-hmm.
He is pretty low maintenance. He's not someone who gets into a lot of trouble. He's not someone who goes out and parties hard. He's not someone who's desperate for a big market. Like he does not any of those things, which is also rare to have. You should say, right? You know, if LaMelo Ball was, I don't know, another player, it would not be surprising if you were seeing like that, you know, request for a trade about now. Okay, but we're not seeing that. And I want to go back to something you said because I think that's actually interesting. You talked about how you hope that if they did trade LaMelo, that they would do kind of like, you know, we're open for business, everyone. We want to trade LaMelo Ball. Send us your best offers. This is how we're going to do it. I'm not sure that will happen that way, right?
Oh, I don't think it will happen that way either. I hope I hope they go, hey NBA, who wants LaMelo? We're accepting bids. That's what I want to happen. Basically, the opposite of
the only
cover
way I
of
think that
darkness of the Luka
happens
situation
is if LaMelo comes to the team and asks for the trade, or they, like you said, have the conversation and say, you know what? Like, we both think this is the right time for us to try and find something new. We're going to try and find a trade. Because if LaMelo wants to stay in Charlotte and you start, like, his name suddenly appears out there, and you're like, guys, I'm giving you my loyalty. You're terrible. I'm the best thing about your franchise, and you're shopping my name out there. That will get him pissed off so quick. And then you see a situation like Jimmy Butler in Miami, and I don't think LaMelo has that in him, but like at that point, agents start getting involved and start trying to maneuver ways out, and it gets really messy. And also, like, your reputation is hurt around the league for like, okay, you were shopping people behind their back. So there is a path where I think it's like public knowledge, but we just saw with the Mark Williams trade, right? Out of the blue, nowhere. And it wouldn't shock me if that was the way it went with LaMelo Ball again. I honestly, I mean, we're going to get into this. Like we've talked a little bit, we're going to get into this in the offseason, a little bit deeper on LaMelo Ball. Once we know how the playoffs go and who'll be the desperate teams, and we've got a better lay of the land, I think, of the NBA in this offseason. We're going to be having the LaMelo Ball discussion because I've really come around on this, Sam. I think I'm 75% confident that they're going to trade LaMelo Ball this summer. I was not, even 2 months ago, I was like, unlikely. I think he'll probably be back. The more I've looked at things, I've thought about it, reflected, I've meditated, I've prayed, and all those things. And I just keep coming back to it. I think it's the right thing to do.
Yep. I think
the draft lottery is key.
Yep.
Right. The draft lottery is key. Where do they end up picking? And if they are, you know, if Dylan Harper is not in reach and Cooper Flagg is not in reach, then I think it gets a little bit more complicated. Like, do you love Yakashonis from Illinois, the point guard there? Like, he's struggled a little bit recently. Like, not a super high ceiling guy, but it wouldn't surprise me. I'm really at that point now.
Yeah, I think for me, what kind of sealed it for me was this the All-Star situation, because that was the league voicing out saying, LaMelo, we see you, but your team sucks, and so what you've been doing, cool, but it doesn't matter because your team is trash, and you have to win to get the love, and I think that was just this proof positive that like until this team starts winning, LaMelo's not going to get the All-Star attention and damn sure not getting the All-NBA attention if the team isn't winning. And I don't want to like speculate on what's important to him, but it's generally pretty important to players to get that recognition, to get those accolades. And
can you imagine how much suck for him? Like everyone around him being like, you know, your team sucks. Why does your team suck? You're a losing basketball player. I mean, the people around him probably aren't saying this, but like the outside noise, right? And how draining that must be. And then those people around him, like, are probably saying, dude, like, why are you in Charlotte? Like, if you went elsewhere, you went to Orlando right now, you'd be, you know, flying. If you went elsewhere, like, no one can be thrilled with the situation. And it just depends, like, how much LaMelo lets that affect him.
And that's why, like, if depending on what the deal is, if it ever happens, this could be a win-win-win trade. Win for the Hornets because they could continue to suck and get assets. A win for LaMelo because he gets to go to a better place, and a win for that new team for acquiring a really good player. And there's a scenario where this works out for everybody involved. And if the Hornets do trade him or have conversations about doing it, it's not because he's bad. It's because he's good, and the team is pretty far away from being competitive, and they owe a large chunk of their salary cap to a guy who should be playing in a better situation. So yeah, it depends on the haul, but there's a real scenario here where it could be a win-win-win for everybody involved if they go down that road.
I agree. And the more I learn about Charles Lee's approach, Hornets DNA, which is about hard work, daily improvement, being coachable, humility, balanced play, physicality, high pressure, being organized. Like, I don't think LaMelo Ball completely aligns with some of those areas that I've listed there, really strongly. I'm not saying it doesn't do any of them, right? But if you were to grade everyone from 0 to 100, I think some of those areas would be some of his weaker areas. I think it's sometimes harder to be organized offensively with LaMelo because of his creativity that he just intrinsically has. You don't play as organized of a style on offense because a lot of it is just LaMelo improvising and reading, reacting. He's struggled with his fouling. He's not going to be a great defensive player. He's not going to deal well with physicality on either end. We talk about continuous improvement. Has he improved the major weaknesses in his game over the course of his career? He's shooting the same percentage at the rim he did now as a rookie, and that was one of the biggest areas is he needs to get better at the rim. He's getting to the free throw line basically at the same rate again. Again, was another concern. Turnovers were an issue early in his career, still a concern now. He's not making the strides that we expected. I remember after his rookie year, I was I'm not putting any ceiling on LaMelo Ball. Mm-hmm. Because rookie year, you're doing that as an 18, 19-year-old. It was incredible. But the problem is those warts are still there, and they're the same warts. And I'm not saying that he's not working hard to try and resolve those things, but even if he is, then it's not being successful because there's still the issue, right? So either he's maybe not working hard enough to develop those things, or he's just maxed out his potential, okay? And it doesn't matter how many more reps he does, how much more training he does, that's just going to be who he is. And him finishing at the rim, yeah, if the team had better spacing, that would help him. But I've watched enough LaMelo Ball games. Some of this has nothing to do with the spacing. Some of this is just his skill and ability to finish. And some of those things aren't going to go away, I think, even in a better team setting. Mm-hmm. And as the number one guy, as the number one option, you can't have these massive warts if you want to be a number one option on a good team. You need to be well-rounded, or the best parts of your game have to be so good, so incredibly good that they make up for where you fall short in other areas. And even the 3-point shooting isn't so good. It's 35% this year. So it's just difficult to find that balance.
Yeah, and there's a conversation about the best fit for LaMelo that we can have on another day, but I don't want to go down that road because I have some thoughts on a certain criteria for a LaMelo destination. But to your point about Charles Lee and what he likes, just wondering here if there's an element to this rebuild where they being the ownership and Jeff Peterson being big believers in what Charles Lee's vision for successful basketball, and giving him a roster at some point that is for him to mold into his vision. And that mold, that sculpting, it was easier with a rookie point guard than a 6th season LaMelo Ball. And I'll be curious if we see that play out, because Brandon Miller, he'll be going into year 3, still moldable, right? Mark Williams, still kind of moldable. LaMelo is pretty defined in what he is right now. So yeah, like it depends on like the priorities of the franchise and the timetable they're looking at. But Charles Lee is a young coach. He's 40. And this is why one of the reasons, not to, talk bad about Steve Clifford or anything, like that's one of the reasons I wasn't a big fan of the Steve Clifford hiring, because it seemed so short term when this would seem like a more long-term project. Charles Lee seemed more suited to be part of a long-term project and to grow and develop a younger locker room. And I could see a scenario where we head in that direction with younger stars, with LaMelo and Bridges moving on.
And if you look at the track record of where Charles Lee has been with Boston, his starting guards were Derek White and Drew Holiday. And then in Milwaukee, his starting guard was Drew Holiday again, right, with the Bucks. Like, they are the anti-LaMelo Ball player archetype, aren't they? Like, they're all those things that I talked about, right? In terms like tough, organized, physical, high pressure, defensive versatility. Like, they're all those things. So, and like, this isn't, you can't just say, well, look, Charles Lee can only, coach with those type of players. That's not true. But it's clear that he does have an affinity, and he's found success with that archetype of player. And then you look at Jeff Peterson, his journey. Well, he drafted Trae Young in Atlanta, right? Which is probably, some of the similar challenges that LaMelo Ball has, Trae Young has. And obviously he left Atlanta while Trae is still there. And I wonder if he learned some lessons about building around Trae Young that like he would take forward here. And when he went to Brooklyn, they had the Kyrie, they were going to do the rebuilding through the draft. They had good young players. All of a sudden, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, James Harden come in town. And they, bombshell meteor hit Brooklyn Nets. And look, all that talent, all that skill and ability and IQ, the team wasn't very good. Now, yeah, they had availability concerns, absolutely. But also, and we see it in Phoenix right now, sometimes like skill and ability and flair and all those things that look incredible, and those things where you look at them and go, wow, there's 5 people on earth who could do what that person just did, doesn't always translate to success. And I just have a feeling like the Hornets want to build this just defensive juggernaut team that has like 5 players who all complement each other extremely well. A little bit like, the Cavaliers, how they, have a pretty well-balanced attack. Even though there are stars in that team, they all play at role players at times within that ecosystem right now. And I wonder if that's the vision here moving forward long term.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm excited for another full off season with Jeff Peterson, so we get like a real idea of like where we're going, because this is year 2 of the ownership, right?
Yeah.
And so like these guys, I'm using guys as a blanket for the owners and front office. They haven't really showed their hand quite yet. I think we got a little peek of what they got going on here, what they want to do. But I think that this summer is going to indicate what Hornets fans should expect or could expect for the next 5 years on this approach, because they're the rare owners who have been chill as far as not cashing in and doing something crazy when they buy a team. And we'll see if it's for it definitely could be has it really worked? It definitely didn't work in the Phoenix. It kind of worked in Minnesota. It's like, we'll see. I guess that ownership thing fell apart. Now I think about it. I don't know if A-Rod's buying that team or not. But
is that going through? That they're gonna buy them in the end.
So like the new owner thing is a real wrinkle into this, and they've been patient, and I respect that, and I'm low-key grateful for that. Even though I would like to see big moves, but like it's smart to lay low.
big moves, early moves in the rebuild is how the Hornets got in this mess in the first place. Right. We said it time and time again. Signing Al Jefferson, signing Gordon Hayward, trading for Nick Batum, right? These shortcuts to success that have landed the Hornets in mediocrity and finding challenges. I will say with Jeff Peterson and the new ownership group, it is so much easier to tear a team down and strip it and sell it for parts like they've done, and they've done it well. Okay. But it's so much easier to do that than it is to start using your draft capital, using your cap space when you're actually trying to get better, right? When you're one of a handful of teams who are trying to suck, you're competing with like 2 or 3, especially in the offseason, not now because everyone's tanking, right? But in the offseason, you're competing with like 2 or 3 teams who are from the outright saying, look, we don't want to get better in this deal. We just want to get stuff. And that's easier than when you're trying to win and you're competing with like the other 27 teams.
Right. True.
That is so much more difficult. And that's what OKC have done so incredibly well. Like, and it's, remember, like the Hornets, I think, recruited OKC's head of scouting and hired him last offseason after the draft, I believe it was. So he's going to be leading up that cycle. So if you're interested in like looking at the draft this year, look at it through a Thunder lens in terms of what type of players that they like, because they have one of those minds in the organization right now. But yeah, building the team up is always harder. And I will never judge or give too much credit. Like I will never give higher than like a B for a grade for a front office that is rebuilding, because it's just an easier assignment.
I will say though, with that Mark Williams trade,
that was an A. Yeah, that was an A.
See, it was too good of a trade. That's why I took it back. That's how you know. That's how you know it was an A. Oh, geez.
Right, Sam. I think that's everything for this week. Hornets playing the Hawks tonight. By the time you listen to this, you'll know the result. Hornets are 0-3 against the Hawks so far, and are going to be without Ball and are going to be without Bridges. I think we're probably going to have a new starting lineup for, I don't know, like the 28th or 9th time this season. I'm guessing Damian Barr is going to start at point guard, I'm guessing. So that'll be interesting. Also, by the next time we speak, they'll play the Knicks at home. They will play the Oklahoma City Thunder away. And the Miami Heat. Quick update on the Miami Heat before we go. How about the Miami Heat? Was it lost 9 in a row now? 7 in a row? Their current streak? They're 10th in the NBA. They're really looking like they're going to struggle to make the playoffs. That first round pick is looking like it could be unprotected. So if you don't enjoy this miserable Hornet season, take joy in the Miami Heat failing.
That's easy to do. That's very easy to do. Yeah. I'm here for that.
Absolutely. Take aim at Tyler Hero, who took LaMelo Ball's place in the All-Star game. You can add that to the list of slights as well. So
go get him, Terry.
All right. Well, Sam, let's get out of here for another week, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Inside the Hive, breaking down all the latest news, thoughts, and analysis of the week. We will catch you next week.